Do you have sex with other drag queens dressed in drag?
If we have sex, you might stop breathing. Pull it off. Pull it off.
I can so see where this episode is going. Hey, it's Nixalina, and this is Let's Get Real as Fuck, my YouTube series where I grab interesting and famous people and I sit their ass down and we talk about all the things people won't usually talk about in polite company. Today's guest needs no introduction. She is larger than life drag queen extraordinaire Becca D'Bus, and she's homegrown right here in Singapore. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I kind of wish you'd dressed up a little bit, if I'm totally honest.
I mean, if I knew what you were wearing, I'd try a little harder.
My outfit's a bit loud, but don't be intimidated.
I wish I showed more skin. I'm so sorry. I always do the wrong assignment.
I mean, I can already tell about your opinions on clashing prints, for example.
What are you talking about?
Maybe you should talk me through the outfit. Let's start off with that.
I feel moderately beautiful, just a tepid, lukewarm level of beauty.
Are they real or fake lashes?
These are 100% real. I was born with them on my way out of my mother. Just scraped the walls.
And that's why they're so curly still.
Yeah, it's all that afterbirth just holding them up.
So I'm going to make a very large assumption here that you're straight? Or...
straight to hell.
I'll see you there. So maybe perhaps you're gay.
I mean, we should maybe point out that there are more possibilities than straight and gay. But yeah, I'm a big fat faggot. I was going to say wearing a dress, but I'm not actually wearing a dress right now. I would usually say wearing women's clothes, but let's face it, there is no woman that would wear this. So yeah, just a big old faggot wearing too many things.
The only reason there's no women, I couldn't pull this off, babe. Like the earrings.
You can try.
Perhaps.
Just pull it off. Pull it off.
I can so see where this episode is going already, by the way, and it's like 2 minutes in.
Yeah.
Do you fancy drag queens when they're queens or when they take all the makeup off? Do you then fancy them? Of that, like, you're like, oh, she's hot, or is it?
So yeah, okay. I should just say that in general, when I am in drag, I'm just too physically uncomfortable to feel remotely sexual about anything.
Oh, really?
I'm too physically uncomfortable to think that somebody is hot.
Are you physically uncomfortable now?
I'm quite warm. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, I'm wearing a lot more layers than you. Also, fat. So, there is that. Like, that is a, I sound like I'm being a little bit glib about it, but it is a reality, right? That for myself, I can't speak for everybody else, but for myself, certainly, being in drag is not a time where I remotely feel sexual.
There's no boner.
It's not possible.
I really wish I had this much effort into my outfits. That's what Becca has, because I'm like, I just can't compete.
I mean, it's not that much effort. I'm just wearing a few things.
There's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on, but it's not effort.
So, when did you decide you liked dressing up like this? Was it a young age? Did you realize that, you're gay and you like dressing up? Like, where did it start?
Well, I came to drag pretty late in life, so I like to say, as I do in my official bio, Becca D'Bus was born at the age of 27. And that's how old I was when I started in drag. I went to school in Boston, and at the end of education, as it were, of formal education, I thought I was going to be a performance artist. I like to say, in the vein of like sitting in galleries and cracking eggs in my head, like that stereotypical image of a performance artist.
Right.
And then I worked on a project, my first job out of college, I worked on a project that involved being in gay clubs and talking to men about their sexual risks, and we were terrible at it. because nobody would talk to us. And then one night we tried going out in drag, and we were phenomenally successful at it. And then I entered a couple amateur contests and realized that in drag, I could say a lot of things I wanted to say in a form that would at least pay for itself.
We've all got bills.
Well, you could say we've all got bills, but actually more than that, it was at least not a loss-making proposition at the time. You know, like now I make my living off it, but at least at that time it wasn't like, oh my God, this hobby is just gonna cost me money. You know what I mean? And so I kept at it.
Well,
And that's been like 17 years, 15 years. It's been a long time.
What?
I'm 43.
Fuck off!
I'm also wearing a lot of makeup.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Also, I'm fat, and you know, like fat people, it's like the lines don't like fill out a bit.
I just called you dude, now I feel like shit.
You can, you know, baby, you can call me whatever.
I really wish I had your jeans. 40, oh my God. That is so unfair.
You have no idea what I look like.
That is true.
I actually look like a very large fishball, and then like every dimension you see on this face right now has been painted on.
So on your Instagram, we only get Becca. We don't get.
Yeah.
There's no like before and after.
I mean, I also think that personally, I find, and I hope this isn't a diss to anybody, but I find that the before and after of a drag queen is terribly boring.
Oh, I'm fascinated.
I understand that. I understand what the fascination is, but I also just feel like it's a story it's an image, and it's a story that's been told over and over and over again. And like, you know, there are like giant YouTube channels that are built just on this one idea. And I mean, as much as like, okay, you know, like my boy self and my drag self maybe don't look that much alike, and there is some kind of a transformation that happens. I also think like, it's not the kind of transformation where you're like, oh my God, I don't believe this person is this person.
Yeah.
It's like, I kind of look like my boy self with a lot of makeup on. I don't, you know, it's like, I don't turn into this like breathtaking creature.
You are so breathtaking.
I am, but you know, it's not that sort of like, oh
You're
my
not
God,
like,
she's become a different animal.
Yeah,
You don't have that, nor do you have this kind of thing where like, I can't believe that's a, you know, this sort of like slightly transphobic version of that conversation. It's like, I can't believe that's a man. You know, it's like, I'm not that, right? So yeah, I generally don't, I don't particularly find it interesting, which is why I don't post it.
So before age of 27, like, you didn't dress up at all? Or
I mean, I didn't go out naked. Is that what you're asking?
so crying shame.
It's true. It is true.
We'd all love a bit
but
of that.
nobody is paying for that shit, so hey.
So I just want, because what I want to know is like, when did you decide like, I want to dress up?
So for me, as a teenager, the school that I went to was a Methodist. It was an all-boys Methodist school. If you live in Singapore, you know what it is. It's Anglo-Chinese school. If you're not from Singapore, if you saw a movie, Crazy Rich Asians, they went to that school.
Right.
They don't say it, but everybody knows it. I was not either, I was certainly crazy, but I was not rich.
The middle bit got skipped
like,
out.
definitely not,
Just crazy
not
Asian.
like, yeah. But it's an all-boys school, and it's an all-boys school with a big history. A big history, not just of like, you know, not just in terms of being a very old school, but it's a big history also of, there are lots of very, shall we say, there are a lot of artists that have come out of that school.
Right.
So in a way, that school has educators that are used to dealing with kids who perhaps are queer or whatever. And I'm also told that my experience of this is a little bit different than a lot of my other friends who were queer. So I feel like I'm giving this place this like, oh my God, it was a heaven for queer people. And I don't know that to be true. I should be clear, I don't know that to be true. I like to say I was too oblivious.
Okay.
Too self-absorbed and too oblivious. But suffice to say that in a school like that, if you were in the drama club, as I was,
really?
You don't really come out.
Because you're out?
Well, it's a different kind of thing. I mean, I wasn't sexually active in secondary school, so it didn't matter in that way. I can tell.
Yeah, shock.
So it didn't matter in that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I also didn't have to put a name to it. I was just around a bunch of other people who we knew to be kindred, shall we say.
Because you use the word queer and I use the word gay, and I'm like, am I being ignorant as fuck here? Because
I don't know if you're being ignorant because we haven't investigated that, but I use both words.
Right, okay, yeah, because I'm like, I'm just so fascinated and I want to know, and I don't want to offend people, and you know.
It's a good place to start.
Right?
Yeah.
As long as I don't offend people, then I'm all good. Okay, so you kind of like, you've never been with a woman, you already knew you were gay, you went to drama.
No, but that's what I'm trying to say. I didn't know I was gay. I just knew that I was around people and
but you've never seen a woman and been like,
who I felt kindred with. You know what I mean?
So
like I felt like I was around community. All of us turned out to be queer in some shape or form.
Right.
But we didn't necessarily put a name to it that had to do with what we wanted to fuck.
So when did you first get with a guy?
Pretty fucking late.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you feel about some guys who are like, I'm only a bottom, right? People are like that, like I only ever.
I mean, I think if that's your thing, that's your thing. I will say, like, the only thing that I think that sometimes gay people we say, whether jokingly or legitimate or honestly, that I think maybe gives me a little bit of pause is this idea of like, oh, like pussy's gross. That's the only thing that I'm just sort of like, okay, I have a lot of judgment about that idea, but beyond that, like whatever.
Mine's not gross.
Well, I just don't think it's. I think it's deeply misogynistic.
Yeah, it shows just a preference. Like it doesn't make.
I don't think it goes as far as a preference. I think it goes a little bit further than a preference.
Yeah, but like, just because you don't like vagina doesn't make it gross.
Exactly, but a lot of gay culture builds on this idea, right? So you very often have to quite actively fight these ideas if you are putting out gay cultural products, shall we say.
You seem very liberal about yourself, the gay community, being drag. You just seem like a very open soul, shall we say.
I like this idea that I might have a soul.
That's a good start.
I'll take that.
And I guess also one thing I'm saying, bear in mind I've never sat down with a drag queen, right? So I just got
Why? You're always standing. You were standing and bent over. I got it. It's cool.
Knees.
You were on your knees with a drag queen.
Yeah, I've never sitting down. Weirdly, it's my first time. So when you first dressed up, when was it like a aha moment, like fuck, I love this, or was you just like, oh, I could do this?
I mean, so I say this a lot about a lot of drag performers, right? The first time you're in drag, you feel a certain power because you're visually spectacular.
Yeah.
Or at least you think you're visually spectacular. And the reality is you're not visually spectacular. The first time in drag, it's pretty busted. And that's something that almost every drag queen, if they're putting themselves in drag, will go through. I mean, my first drag face was 2 half moons of glitter over ostensibly my eyelids, but quite a bit further. White lips.
Okay, right.
And the possibly most misplaced cheek contour possible ever in the history of mankind. I can promise you, you don't. So I don't I should be real. There was not this moment like, oh, this is it.
Right.
But for me, it was in performing that I was like, oh, this is something that's really fun. And I also like I've always had an interest in fashion and garments and that sort of thing. And because I am sized and shaped the way I am, if I want to have a particularly fun wardrobe of costumes, I'm making everything. There's not a possibility of going out and shopping too much, right? Because most women don't come this size. And most large women don't really want to dress like clowns. I mean, that's real. These two things come together in drag, right? That's the sort of being involved in queer community and in a sense, the sheer ecstasy of being around your people. And then there's also the pleasure of exploring these creative avenues that I've always been interested in exploring anyway, costumes, performing.
Would you go to the shops like this? Would you pop down to Vivo City notice?
I have. It's not fun. It's not so fun in Singapore, and really the reason it's not fun in Singapore is it's hot.
What was the reception? If like you went out like this, what would the general public?
In truth, you'd have to ask them.
Do you feel that there's a shame against you in drag or you as a gay man in Singapore?
I think that what gets policed, whether I'm in drag or not in drag, because even when I'm not in drag, I don't necessarily dress in a particularly masculine way. I don't care, you know.
Right.
As we mentioned, Singapore is very hot. We are either somewhere between moist, sweaty, and wet,
Yeah.
right?
Sometimes all three at the same time.
Yeah, all at the same time, depending on the part of the body. But I think Singapore is actually too hot to wear pants in. And so I very often don't wear pants. I very often am like in large dresses and I'm just like floating around town. I don't care. Like,
Oh, you wear dresses around town? I mean,
yeah.
not like drag,
Yeah, out of drag.
Oh.
For me, in my own understanding of like my gender and all that, like that doesn't make me less male or more female or whatever else. It's just what I wear. And I think that at the end of the day, what's policed actually is, I mean, many things, but gender is one of the things that gets policed a lot in a lot of different ways. And I feel like as a person who doesn't care that much about wearing, you know, what gets coded as menswear all the time, I kind of have an experience of it that's maybe different than a lot of other people. So, like for instance, it's very easy to look. I think it's quite easy to look at a drag queen, especially if it's like the way I do. It's quite easy to like sort of discount that because it's very easy to say that this person's in a costume.
Yes.
Right? And,
Yeah.
and it's then easy to just compartmentalize that away. It's a lot more difficult to look at a man in a dress walking about and not moving in a particularly feminine way and know what to do with that. So I have personally found that like that gets policed by people quite a lot, right? Like if I'm getting that sort of like stink eye stare, it's often not when I'm in drag, but when I'm out of drag, but not necessarily in like quote unquote men's clothing.
Not in your stereotypical shorts and t-shirt. Or
A good friend of mine put it thusly. He said, we're men with an optional relationship with masculinity.
Oh, that's nice.
I thought it's a nice way of putting it, and I think that's true. I think I do have a fairly optional relationship with like what generally is thought of as masculinity.
Do you find there's any, like moving away from your sexuality, is there any shame to your size?
Well, that's the thing. I think these things are all actually connected.
Right.
I think that fat bodies, of course, I mean, anybody who's lived in this world knows that that this is not a society that has a lot of kindness for fat people. And that lack of kindness for fat people is often couched in all sorts of language that might have to do with disgust. It might have to do with a refusal to accept fat bodies as sexual. It might have to do with it might have to do with an expression of actually paradoxically care, right? It's like I'm just worried about your health, you know, or some version of this. But actually, if we think about it, what's being policed is also gender, right? Because we don't think of curvy bodies as masculine. And therefore, there's a questionable currency to your body, right? Like that a masculine body has more value than a not masculine body. Because also it's hard to then look at a fat male body and think necessarily feminine.
But then there are people that like have, it's not a fetish, it's like, I only fancy big men, I only fancy big women.
That's all real, but I think what you just said right there is very key. You're right, it's not a fetish, it's just what you think is attractive, but it is not normal. And if we think of normal as like what, it's not mainstream, shall we say that? Not the majority, right? And we then have to ask the question of why that is. How do we come to this place? And why is it so, what's so subversive about the idea of an attractive fat body? And in a lot of ways, fat female body, a curvaceous female body, is less subversive, I think, than a sexualized fat male body.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely made progress, the natural, like obviously there's sites now not airbrushing women and models, you know, like keeping the stretch marks in, using real women. So it's definitely getting there, but still, there is still that stigma attached to, I don't think, being...
Yeah, and I think that, for me, that, you know, that if we really want to get into it, there's also this question of like what value is this body, right?
Yeah.
Like that skinny bodies have more value because in a way they're thought of as healthier, even though it's not necessarily true, as we all know. They're thought of as perhaps having more sexual currency. They're certainly easier to shop for. You know, like in all these ways, they are more, in a sense, normalized, but also in a sense valuable.
Have you had guys like I fucking love how big you are?
Yeah, of course.
There's guys that go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the other thing that is real about being gay, or let me put it another way. I think one of the realities of like the sexual economy for gay men, shall we put it that way, is that if you're not the mainstream, which in Singapore unfortunately means, you know, gym worked out Chinese middle 20-something-year-old. If that is not who you are, then and you are looking to have the word casual. I hate the term casual sex, but if you're looking at sex beyond like sort of relationship, then you should become very comfortable with this idea, I believe, in being a type.
Right.
Because in that situation, it's not about who you are. Let's be real, right? It's about getting off, and I think people should get off as much as they want to, in whatever ways they want to. You know, I think that's very important.
100%. Do you have a type? Like, do you fancy big men or little men?
Breathing is helpful.
Got a pulse?
Not necessarily. No, I usually say breathing, and it shouldn't look like if we have sex, you might stop breathing.
Right. So you've got to be able to handle all of this fabulousness.
Or just handle like having sex. You know what I mean? You shouldn't look like if your blood pressure spiked, you might just drop dead. Like I kind of don't want to be in that situation.
I have a really a strong question. I've always wanted to ask a drag queen this, right?
Try.
Okay.
I look forward to either satisfying you or not.
Do you have sex with other drag queens dressed in drag?
No, because I don't feel sexual in drag.
Do they fancy you? Do they try it on with you?
I've never asked because I've never felt the
I didn't know if you was in changing rooms and you just like a sneaky feel, or like guys like.
Oh baby, a changing room for drag queens is usually like a sweaty little closet with no ventilation, and you are desperately trying to get on stage,
right?
And not be naked, right? So
Sure.
There's usually not. Like, for me, that's like pure work mode at that point.
Talking about getting on stage, you got a show coming up, right?
Yeah, I do.
How's the projects coming? Like, what's in the next few months for you?
So in the before times, I was the producer and host of a show called Riot, which was Singapore's only regular drag review. It happened once a month at the Hard Rock Cafe.
The Hard Rock Cafe, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But now you can't perform where where people are eating and drinking.
Can I ask you a really naughty question?
You can ask all kinds of naughty questions if it's actually naughty.
No.
If not, like, you know, go sit in the corner.
You'll be like, bitch face. How much money do you make?
That's a good question. It's a good question. So
It's rude, I know, but.
No, I mean,
okay.
I think it's rude, but I think it's also important to understand that I won't speak necessarily for myself, because actually my experience of that is not typical.
Okay.
But what I can say is this. Again, talking about the before times, I was probably among the busier drag queens in this town. So
Okay.
I had a twice weekly gig at a venue called Lulu's Lounge.
I love Lulu's. You were there, really?
I was there every Saturday and every Wednesday. Plus I was the producer of a show, which means that I was, on the one hand, taking on the risk, but on the other hand, if there were like profits to be made off the door, I was earning that. And I was doing that for maybe a year and a half. And prior to that, I was doing drag full time since 2015. And it was only after doing Lulu's for a year and a half, Lulu's and Riot for a year and a half, that I found myself in a situation where I could honestly say I was not on the verge of complete financial disaster.
Wow.
So
it doesn't pay well.
It doesn't, and yeah, it doesn't.
Right.
It's and there are not a lot of opportunities, and a big part of the problem, at least in Singapore, is that our real estate is just so expensive, and because real estate is so expensive, for venues, it is very difficult to take on the risk of doing shows. It's very difficult for anybody to try anything new other than the most tested of formulas. And the truth about putting on a show in a club, which is typically where people might see a drag show, is that an audience that is standing and wrapped, yes, a drag show might draw people into a venue, but for the half an hour to an hour and a half that people are wrapped and watching the show, they're not walking to the bar. And that's the math, right? Like that's what somebody has to figure out.
Right.
So yeah.
And on that note, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
And that's a wrap.